sitting behind you have a gentleman who used to be counsel for the committee, Mr. Jim Barnett, and if he's affiliated with Facebook, you've got a good one. If he's not, he's just got a great seat. I don't know what it is. I'm going to read you a question that I was asked. I got this through Facebook, and I've got dozens like this. So my first question, please ask Mr. Zuckerberg, why is Facebook censoring conservative bloggers such as Diamond and Silk? Facebook called them unsafe to the community. That is ludicrous. They hold conservative views. That isn't unsafe. What's your response to?
Congressman, in that specific case, our team made an enforcement error, and we have already gotten in touch with them to reverse it.
Well, Facebook does tremendous good. When I met you in my office 8 years ago, you don't remember that, but I've got a picture of you when you had curly hair, and Facebook had 500 million users. Now it's got over 2 billion. That's a success story in anybody's book. It's such an integral part of certainly young Americans' lives that you need to work with Congress and the community to ensure that it is a neutral, safe, and to the largest extent possible, private platform. Do you agree with that?
Congressman, I do agree that we should work to give people the fullest free expression that is possible. That's what, when I talk about giving people a voice, that's what I care about.
Okay. Let's talk about children. Children can get a Facebook account of their own, I believe, starting at age 13. Is that not correct?
Congressman, that's correct.
Okay. Is there any reason that we couldn't have just a no data sharing policy, period, until you're 18? Just if you're a child with your own Facebook account, until you reach the age of 18, you know, you know, you can't share anything. It's their data, their picture. It doesn't go anywhere. Nobody gets to scrape it. Nobody gets to access it. It's absolutely, totally private. Well, for children, what's wrong with that?
Congressman, we have a number of measures in place to protect minors specifically. We make it so that adults can't contact minors who they aren't already friends with. We make it so that certain content that may be inappropriate for minors we don't show. The reality that we see is that teens often do want to share their opinions publicly. And that's a service that...
well, we'd let them opt in to do that.
Yes, we do.
But don't, you know, unless they specifically allow it, then don't allow it. That's my point.
Congressman, every time that someone chooses to share something on Facebook, you go to the app, right there, it says, who do you want to share with? When you sign up for a Facebook account, it starts off sharing with just your friends. If you want to share it publicly, you have to specifically go and change that setting to be sharing publicly.
But I'm about out of time. I actually use Facebook, and you know, I know if you take the time, you can go to your privacy and click on that, and you can go to your settings and click on that. You can pretty well set up your Facebook account to be almost totally private, but you have to really work at it. And my time's expired. Hopefully we can do some questions in writing as a follow-up.
Absolutely. Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Rush, for 4 minutes for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, welcome. In the 1960s, our government, acting through the FBI and local police, maliciously tricked individuals and organizations into participating in something called COINTELPRO, which was a counterintelligence program where they tracked and shared information about civil rights activists, their political, social, civic, even religious affiliations. And I personally was a victim of COINTELPRO. Your organization, your methodology in my opinion, is similar. You're truncating the basic rights of the American promise of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness by the wholesale invasion and manipulation of their right to privacy. Mr. Zuckerberg, what is the difference between Facebook's methodology and the methodology of the American political pariah, J. Edgar Hoover?
Congressman, this is an important question because I think people often ask what the difference is between surveillance and what we do, and I think that the difference is extremely clear, which is that on Facebook, you have control over your information. The content that you share, you put there. You can take it down at any time. The information that we collect, you can choose to have us not collect. You could delete any of it, and of course you can leave Facebook if you want. I know of no surveillance organization that gives people the option to delete the data that they have or even know what they're collecting.
Mr. Zuckerberg, you should be commended that Facebook has grown so big so fast. It is no longer the company that you started in your dorm room. Instead, it's one of great American success stories. That much influence comes with enormous social responsibility of which you have failed to act and to protect and to consider. Should Facebook, by default, protect users' information? Why is the onus on the user to opt in to privacy and security settings?
Congressman, as I said, every time that a person chooses to share something on Facebook, they're proactively going to the service and choosing that they want to share a photo, write a message to someone. And every time there's a control right there, not buried in settings somewhere, but right there when they're posting about who they want to share it with.
Mr. Zuckerberg, I only have a few more seconds. In November 2017, ProPublica reported that Facebook was still allowed housing advertisers to systematically exclude advertisements to specific racial groups and explicitly prohibited practice. This is just one example where Facebook has allowed race to improperly play a role. What has Facebook done, and what are you doing to ensure that your targeted advertisements and other components of your platform are in compliance with federal laws such as the Civil Rights Act of 1968?
Congressman, since we learned about that, we removed the option for advertisers to exclude ethnic groups from targeting.
When did you do that?
The gentleman's time has expired. We need to go now to the gentleman from Michigan, Mr. Upton, for 4 minutes.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to the committee. A number of times in the last day or two, you've indicated that, in fact, you're now open to some type of regulation, and we know, of course, that you're the dominant social media platform without any true competitor, in all frankness, and you have hundreds, if not thousands, of folks that would be required to help navigate any type of regulatory environment. Some would argue that a more regulatory environment might ultimately stifle new platforms and innovators. Some might describe as desperately needed competition, i.e. regulatory complexity helps protect those folks like you. It could create a harmful barrier to entry for some startups, particularly ones that might want to compete with you. So should we policymakers up here be more focused on the needs of startups over large incumbents? And what kind of policy regulatory environment would you want instead of managing maybe a Fortune 500 company if you were launching a startup to take on the big guy?
Congressman, thank you. And let me say a couple of things on this. First, to your point about competition, the average American uses about 8 different apps to communicate and stay connected to people. So there's a lot of competition that we feel every day. and that's an important force that we definitely feel in running the company. Second, on your point about regulation, the internet is growing in importance around the world in people's lives, and I think that it is inevitable that there will need to be some regulation. So my position is not that there should be no regulation, but I also think that you have to be careful about what regulation you put in place for a lot of the reasons that you're saying. I think a lot of times regulation, by definition, puts in place rules that a company that is larger, that has resources like ours, can easily comply with, but that might be more difficult for a smaller startup to comply with. So I think that these are all things that need to be thought through very carefully when thinking through what rules we want to put in place.
To follow up a question that Mr. Barton asked about Silk and Diamond, I don't know whether you know about this particular case. I have a former state rep who's running for state senate. He's the former Michigan lottery commissioner, so he's a guy of fairly good political prominence. He announced for state senate just in the last week, and he had what I thought was a rather positive announcement, and I'll read to you precisely what it was. I'm proud to announce my candidacy for state senate. Lansing needs conservative West Michigan values, and as our next state senator, I will work to strengthen our economy, limit government, lower our auto insurance rates, balance the budget, stop sanctuary cities, pay down government debt, be a pro-life, pro-Second Amendment lawmaker, end. It was rejected, and the response from you all was it wasn't approved because it doesn't follow our advertising policies. We don't allow ads that contain shocking, disrespectful, or sensational content, including ads that depict violence or threats of violence. I'm not sure where the threat was based on what he tried to post.
Congressman, I'm not sure either. I'm not familiar with that specific case. It's quite possible that we made a mistake, and we'll follow up afterwards on that.
Okay.
Overall, I mean, we have, by the end of this year, we'll have about 20,000 people at the company who work on security and content review related issues, but there's a lot of content flowing through the systems and a lot of reports, and unfortunately, we don't always get these things right when people report it to us.
Okay, thank you.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from California, Ms. Eshu, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Zuckerberg. First, I believe that our democratic institutions are undergoing a stress test in our country. And I believe that American companies owe something to America. I think the damage done to our democracy relative to Facebook and its platform being weaponized are incalculable. Enabling the cynical manipulation of American citizens for the purpose of influencing an election is deeply offensive, and it's very dangerous. Putting our private information on offer without concern for possible misuses, I think, is simply irresponsible. I invited my constituents going into the weekend to participate in this hearing today by submitting what they want to ask you. And so my questions are theirs. And Mr. Chairman, I'd like unanimous consent to place all of their questions in the record.
Without objection.
So these are a series of just yes/no questions. Do you think you have a moral responsibility to run a platform that protects our democracy? Yes or no?
Congresswoman, yes.
Have users of Facebook who were caught up in the Cambridge Analytica debacle been notified?
Yes, we are starting to notify people this week. We started Monday, I believe.
Will Facebook offer to all of its users a blanket opt-in to share their privacy data with any third-party users?
Congresswoman, yes, that's how our platform works. You have to opt in to sign into any app before you use it.
Well, let me just add that it is a minefield in order to do that. And you have to make it transparent, clear, in pedestrian language, just once. This is what we will do with your data. Do you want this to happen or not? So I think that this is being blurred. I think you know what I mean by it. Are you aware of other third-party information mishandlings that have not been disclosed?
Congresswoman, no. Although we are currently going through the process of investigating every single
You're not
app
sure?
that had access to a large amount of data.
What does that mean?
It means that we're going to look into every app that had a large amount of access to data in the past before we lock down the platform.
So you're not
imagine
aware?
that because there are tens of thousands of apps, we will find
All
some
right,
that have
I only
suspicious
have 4
activity.
minutes.
And when we
Was
find
your
them-
data included in the data sold to the malicious third parties? Your personal data?
Yes.
It was. Are you willing to change your business model in the interest of protecting individual privacy?
Congresswoman, have made and are continuing to make changes to reduce the amount of
No,
data
are you
that-
willing to change your business model in the interest of protecting individual privacy?
Congresswoman, I'm not sure what that means.
Well, I'll follow up with you on it. When did Facebook learn that Cambridge Analytica's research project was actually for targeted psychographic political campaign work?
Congresswoman, it might be useful to clarify what actually happened here.
Well, no,
developer who was a
I don't have
researcher-
time for a long answer, though. When did Facebook learn that? And when you learned it, did you contact their CEO immediately? And if not, why not?
Congresswoman, yes. When we learned in 2015 that a Cambridge University researcher associated with the academic institution that built an app that people chose to
We
share
know what
their data
happened with them, but I'm asking you.
Yes, I'm answering your question.
Right.
When we learned about that, we
So in
immediately...
2015, you learned about it?
Yes.
And you spoke to their CEO immediately?
We shut down the app.
Did you speak to
And
their
we
CEO
demanded-
immediately?
We got in touch with them, and we asked them we demanded that they delete any of the data that they had, and their chief data officer told us that they had.
The gentlelady's time has expired.
Thank
Chair
you.
now recognizes the gentleman from Illinois, Mr. Shimkus, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for being here, Mr. Zuckerberg. Two things. First, I want to thank Facebook. You streamlined our congressional baseball game last year. We got the managers here, and I was told that because of that, we raised an additional $100,000 for DC literacy and feeding kids and stuff. So that's the other thing is I usually put my stuff up on the TV. I don't want to do it very much because it's my dad, and he'd be mad if he went international like you are. And he's been on Facebook for a long time. He's 88. It's been good for connecting with kids and grandkids. I just got my mother involved on an iPad, and because she can't handle a keyboard. And I did this last week. So that in this world of activity, I still think there is a positive benefit for my parents to be engaged on this platform. So, but there's issues that's being raised today. And so I'm going to go into a couple of those. Facebook developed access to user and friend data back in, your main update was in 2014. So the question is, what triggered that update?
Congressman, this is an important question to clarify. So in 2007, we launched the platform in order to make it so that people could sign into other apps, bring some of their information, and some of their friends' information to have social experiences. This created a lot of innovative experiences, new games, companies like Zynga. There were companies that you're familiar with, like Netflix and Spotify, had integrations with this that allowed social experiences in their apps. But unfortunately, there were also a number of apps that used this for abuse, to collect people's data.
So if I can interrupt, it's just, you identified that there was possibly social scraping going on.
Yeah, there was abuse. And that's why in 2014, we took the step of fundamentally changing how the platform works. So now, when you sign into an app, you can bring your information. And if a friend has also signed into the app, then the app can know that you're friends, so you can have a social experience in that app. But when you sign into an app, it now no longer brings information from other people.
Yeah, let me go to your announcement of audits. Who's going to conduct an audit when we're talking about, are there other Cambridge Analytics out there?
Yes, Congressman, good question. So we're going to start by doing an investigation internally of every single app that had access to a large amount of information before we lock down the platform. If we detect any suspicious activity at all, we are working with third-party auditors I imagine there will have to be a number of them because there are a lot of apps, and they will conduct the audit for us.
Yeah, I think we would hope that you would bring in a third party to help us clarify and have more confidence. The last question I have is, in yesterday's hearing, you talked a little about Facebook tracking in different scenarios, including logged off users. Can you please clarify us how that works, and how does tracking work across different devices?
Yes, Congressman, thank you for giving me the opportunity to clarify that. So one of the questions is what information do we track and why about people who are not signed into Facebook? We track certain information for security reasons and for ads reasons. For security, it's to make sure that people who are not signed into Facebook can't scrape people's public information. You can, even when you're not signed in, you can look up the information that people have chosen to make public on their page because they wanted to share it with everyone, so there's no reason why you should have to be logged in. But nonetheless, we don't want someone to be able to go through and download every single public piece of information. Even if someone chose to make it public, that doesn't mean that it's good to allow someone to aggregate it. So even if someone isn't logged in, we track certain information like how many pages they're accessing as a security measure. The second thing that we do is we provide an ad network that third-party websites and apps can run in order to help them make money. And those ads, similar to what Google does and what the rest of the industry does, it's not limited to people who are just on Facebook. So for the purposes of that, we may also collect information to make it so that those ads are more relevant and work better on those websites. There's a control that for that second class of information around ad targeting, anyone can turn off, has complete control over it. For obvious reasons, we do not allow people to turn off the measurement that we do around security.
The gentleman's time has expired. We now turn to the gentleman from New York, Mr. Engel, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, you have roots in my district, the 16th Congressional District of New York. I know that you attended Ardsley High School and grew up in Westchester County. As you know, Westchester has a lot to offer, and I hope that you might commit to returning to Westchester County, perhaps to do a forum on this and some other things. I hope you would consider that. We'll be in touch with you. But I know that Ardsley High School is very proud of you. You mentioned yesterday that Facebook was deceived by Alexander Kogan when he sold user information to Cambridge Analytica. Does Facebook, therefore, plan to sue Alexander Kogan, Cambridge University, or Cambridge Analytica, perhaps for unauthorized access to computer networks, exceeding access to computer networks, or breach of contract, and why or why not?
Congressman, it's something that we're looking into. We already took action by banning him from the platform, and we're going to be doing a full audit to make sure that he gets rid of all the data that he has as well. To your point about Cambridge University, what we've found now is that there's a whole program associated with Cambridge University where a number of researchers, not just Alexander Kogan, although to our current knowledge, he's the only one who sold the data to Cambridge Analytica. There were a number of other researchers who were building similar apps. So we do need to understand whether there was something bad going on at Cambridge University overall that will require a stronger action from us.
You mentioned before in your remarks hate speech. We've seen the scale and reach of extremism balloon in the last decade, partially because of the expansion of social platforms, whether it's a white supremacist rally in Charlottesville that turned violent, or to ethnic cleansing in Burma that resulted in the second largest refugee crisis in the world. Are you aware of any foreign or domestic terrorist organizations, hate groups, criminal networks, or other extremist networks that have scraped Facebook user data? And if they have, and if they do it in the future, how would you go about getting it back or deleting it?
Congressman, we're not aware of any specific groups like that that have engaged in this. We are, as I've said, conducting a full investigation of any apps that had access to a large amount of data, and if we find anything suspicious, we'll tell everyone affected. We do not allow hate groups on Facebook overall. So if there's a group that their primary purpose or a large part of what they do is spreading hate, we will ban them from the platform overall.
So do you adjust your algorithms to prevent individuals interested in violence or nefarious activities from being connected with other like-minded individuals?
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Do you adjust your algorithms to prevent individuals interested in violence or bad activities from being connected with other like-minded individuals?
Congressman, yes, that's certainly an important thing that we need to do.
Okay, and finally, let me say this. Many of us are very angry about Russian influence in the 2016 presidential elections and Russian influence over our presidential elections. Does Facebook have the ability to detect when a foreign entity is attempting to buy a political ad? And is that process automated? Do you have procedures in place to inform key government players when a foreign entity is attempting to buy a political ad or when it might be taking other steps to interfere in an election?
Congressman, yes, this is an extremely important area. After we were slow to identify the Russian information operations in 2016, this has become a top priority for our company to prevent that from ever happening again. Especially this year in 2018, which is such an important election year with the US midterms, but also major elections in India, Brazil, Mexico, Hungary, Pakistan, and a number of other places. So we're doing a number of things that I'm happy to talk about or follow up with afterwards around deploying new AI tools that can proactively catch fake accounts that Russia or others might create to spread misinformation. And one thing that I'll end on here, just because I know we're running low on time, is since the 2016 election, there have been a number of significant elections, including the French presidential election, the German election, and last year the US Senate Alabama special election. And the AI tools that we deployed in those elections were able to proactively take down tens of thousands of fake accounts that may have been trying to do the activity that you're talking about. So our tools are getting better. For as long as Russia has people who are employed who are trying to perpetrate this kind of interference, it will be hard for us to guarantee that we're going to fully stop everything. But it's an arms race, and I think that we're making ground and are doing better and better and are confident about how we're going to be able to do it.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Chair recognizes Chairman of the Health Subcommittee, Dr. Burgess of Texas, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thanks to our witness for being here today. Mr. Chairman, I have a number of articles that I'm asking unanimous consent to insert into the record. I know I won't have time to get to all of my
Without
questions.
objection, and we put the slide up you requested.
And so I'm going to be submitting some questions for the record that are referencing these articles. One is Friended, How the Obama Campaign Connected with Young Voters by Michael Scherer. We already know how to protect ourselves from Facebook, and I hope I get this name right, Zeynep Tufekci. And It's Time to Break Up Facebook by Eric Wilson, who, in the interest of full disclosure, is a former staffer, and I will be referencing those articles in some written questions. I consulted my technology guru, Scott Adams, in the form of Dilbert, going back 21 years ago, and when you took the shrink wrap off of a piece of software that you bought, you were automatically agreeing to be bound by the terms and conditions. So we've gone a long way from taking the shrink wrap off of an app, but I don't know that things have changed all that much. And I guess, does Facebook have a position, a position that you recommend for elements of a company's terms and conditions that you encourage consumers to look at before they click on the acceptance?
Congressman, yes. I think that it's really important for the service that people understand what they're doing and signing up for and how the service works. We have laid out all of what we do in the terms of service because that's what is legally required of us.
Let me just ask you, because we're going to run short on time, have you laid out for people what it would be indicative of a good actor versus a less than good actor in someone who's developed one of these applications?
Congressman, yes, we have a developer terms of service, which is separate from the normal terms of service for individuals using the service.
Is the average consumer able to determine what elements would indicate poor or weak consumer protections just by their evaluation of the terms and conditions? Do you think that's possible?
Congressman, I'm not sure what you mean by that.
Well, can the average person, the average lay person, look at the terms and conditions and make the evaluation, is this a strong enough protection for me to enter into this arrangement? Look, I'm as bad as anyone else. I see an app, I want it, I download it, I breeze through the stuff, just take me to the good stuff in the app. But if a consumer wanted to know, could they know?
Congressman, I think you're raising an important point, which is that I think if someone wanted to know, they could. But I think that a lot of people probably just accept terms of service without taking the time to read through it. I view our responsibility not as just legally complying with laying it out and getting that consent, but actually trying to make sure that people understand what's happening throughout the product. That's why every single time that you share something on Facebook or one of our services, right there is a control in line where you control who you want to share with. Because I don't just think that this is about a terms of service, it's contextual. You want to present people with the information about what they might be doing and give them the relevant controls in line at the time that they're making those decisions, not just have it be in the background sometime or up front, make a one-time decision.
Yeah, let me move on to something else. Mr. Pallone brought up the issue of he wanted to see more regulation. We actually passed a bill through this committee last Congress dealing with data breach notification, not so much for Facebook, but for the credit card breaches. A good bill. Many of the friends on the other side of the dais voted against it, but it was Ms. Blackburn's bill, and I think it's one we should consider again in light of what's going on here. But you also signed a consent decree back in 2011. And, you know, when I read through that consent decree, it's pretty explicit. And there is a significant fine of $40,000 per violation per day, and if you've got 2 billion users, you can see how those fines would mount up pretty quickly. So in the course of your audit, are you extrapolating data for the people at the Federal Trade Commission for that, the terms and conditions of the consent decree?
That is, I'm not sure what you mean by extrapolating data.
Well, you've referenced there are audits that are ongoing. Are you making that information from those audits available to our friends at the agency at the Federal Trade Commission?
Congressman, as you know, the FTC is investigating this, and we're certainly going to be complying with them and working with them on that investigation.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Green, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome to our committee. I want to follow up on what my friend from North Texas talked about on his cartoon. Next month, the General Data Protection Regulation, the GDPR, goes into effect in the European Union. The GDPR is pretty prescriptive on how companies treat consumer data, and it makes it clear that consumers need to be in control of their own data. And Mr. Zuckerberg, Facebook has committed to abiding to these consumer protections in Europe, and you face large penalties if they don't. In recent days, you've said that Facebook intends to make the same settings available to users everywhere, not only in Europe. Did I understand correctly that Facebook would not only make the same settings available, but that will make the same protections available to Americans that they will the Europeans?
Yes, Congressman, all the same controls will be available around the world.
Okay. And you commit today that Facebook will extend the same protections to Americans that European users will receive under the GDPR?
Yes, Congressman. We believe that everyone around the world deserves good privacy controls. We've had a lot of these controls in place for years. The GDPR requires us to do a few more things, and we're going to extend that to the world.
There are many requirements in the GDPR, so I'm just going to focus on a few of them. The GDPR requires that the company's request for user consent to be requested in a clear and concise way using language that is understandable and be clearly distinguishable from other pieces of information, including terms and conditions. How will that requirement be implemented in the United States?
Congressman, we're going to put at the top of everyone's app when they sign in a tool that walks people through the settings and gives people the choices and asks them to make decisions on how they want their settings set.
Okay. One of the GDPR's requirements is data portability. Users must be permitted to request a full copy of their information and be able to share that information with any companies that they want to. I know Facebook allows users in the U.S. to download their Facebook data. Does Facebook plan to use the currently existing ability of users to download their Facebook data as the means to comply with the GDPR's data portability requirement?
Congressman, I think we may be updating it a little bit, but as you say, we've had the ability to download your information for years now, and people have the ability to see everything that they have in Facebook, to take that out, delete their account, and move their data anywhere that they want.
does that download file include all the information Facebook has collected about any given individual? In other words, if I download my Facebook information, is there other information accessible to you within Facebook that I wouldn't see on that document, such as browsing history or the inferences that Facebook has drawn from users for advertising purposes?
Congressman, I believe that all of your information is in that file.
Okay. GDPR also gives users the right to object to the processing of their personal data for marketing purposes, which, according to Facebook's website, includes custom micro-targeted audiences for advertising. Will the same right be available to Facebook users in the United States, and how will that be implemented?
Congressman, I'm not sure how we're going to implement that yet. Let me follow up with you on that.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, as a small, Facebook conducted a couple of years ago an effort in our district in Houston for our small businesses, and it was one of the most successful outreach I've seen. So I appreciate that outreach to helping small businesses use Facebook to market their products. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, gentlemen. The chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Tennessee, Ms. Blackburn, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, I tell you, I think your cozy community, as Dr. Mark Jameson recently said, is beginning to look a whole lot like the Truman Show, where people's identities and relationships are made available to people that they don't know. And then that data is crunched and it is used, and they are fully unaware of this. So I've got to ask you, I think what we're getting to here is, who owns the virtual you? Who owns your presence online? And I'd like for you to comment. Who do you think owns an individual's presence online? Who owns their virtual you? Is it you or is it them?
Congresswoman, I believe that everyone owns their own content online. And that's the first line of our terms of service. If you read it, says that.
And where does privacy rank as a corporate value for Facebook?
Congresswoman, giving people control of their information and how they want to set their privacy is foundational to the whole service. It's not just a kind of an add-on feature, something we have to comply with.
Well,
the reality is, if you have a photo, if you just think about this in your day-to-day life.
I can't let you filibuster right now. A constituent of mine who's a benefits manager brought up a great question in a meeting at her company last week. And she said, you know, healthcare, you've got HIPAA, you've got Gramm-Leach-Bliley, you've got the Fair Credit Reporting Act. These are all compliance documents for privacy. For other sectors of the industry, she was stunned that there are no privacy documents that apply to you all. And we've heard people say that, you know, and you've said you're considering maybe you need more regulation. What we think is we need for you to look at new legislation. And you're hearing there'll be more bills brought out in the next few weeks, but we have had a bill, the Browser Act, and I'm certain that you're familiar with this. It's bipartisan, and I thank Mr. Lipinski and Mr. Lance and Mr. Flores for their good work on this legislation. We've had it for over a year, and certainly we've been working on this issue for about 4 years. And what this would do is have one regulator, one set of rules for the entire ecosystem. And will you commit to working with us to pass privacy legislation, to pass the Browser Act? Will you commit to doing that?
Congresswoman, I'm not directly familiar with the details of what you just said, but I certainly think that regulation in this area...
Let's get familiar with the details. As you have heard, we need some rules and regulations. This is only 13 pages. The Browser Act is 13 pages, so you can easily become familiar with it, and we would appreciate your help. And I've got to tell you, as Mr. Green just said, as you look at the EU privacy policies, you're already doing much of that, if you're doing everything you claim, because you will have to allow consumers to control their data, to change, to erase it. You have to give consumers opt-in so that mothers know. My constituents in Tennessee want to know that they have a right to privacy, and we would hope that that's important to you all. I want to move on and ask you something else, and please get back to me once you've reviewed the Browser Act. I would appreciate hearing from you. We've done one hearing on algorithms. I chair Communications and Technology Subcommittee here. We're getting ready to do a second one on algorithms. We're going to do one next week on prioritization. So I'd like to ask you, do you subjectively manipulate your algorithms to prioritize or censor speech?
Congresswoman, we don't think about what we're doing as censoring speech. I think that there are types of content like terrorism that I think that we all agree we do not want to have on our service. So we build systems that can identify those and can remove that content, and we're very proud of that work.
Let me tell you something right now. Diamond and Silk is not terrorism.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair recognizes gentlelady from Colorado, Ms. DeGette, for 4 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, we appreciate your contrition and we appreciate your commitment to resolving these past problems. From my perspective, though, and my colleagues on both sides of the aisle in this committee, we're interested in looking forward to preventing this kind of activity, not just with Facebook, but with others in your industry. And as has been noted by many people already, we've been relying on self-regulation in your industry for the most part. We're trying to explore what we can do to prevent further breaches. So I want to ask you a whole series of fairly quick questions. They should only require yes or no answers. Mr. Zuckerberg, at the end of 2017, Facebook had a total shareholder equity of just over $74 billion. Is that correct?
Sorry, Congresswoman, I'm not familiar.
At the end of 2017, Facebook had a total shareholder equity of over $74 billion, correct?
Of over that?
That's correct. You're the CEO.
The market cap of the company was greater than that, yes.
Greater than 74. Last year, Facebook earned a profit of $15.9 billion on $40.7 billion in revenue, correct? Yes or no? Now, since the revelations surrounding Cambridge Analytica, Facebook has not noticed a significant increase in users deactivating their accounts. Is that correct?
Yes.
Now, since the revelations surrounding Cambridge Analytica, Facebook has also not noticed a decrease in user interaction on Facebook, correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay. Now, I want to take a minute to talk about some of the civil and regulatory penalties that we've been seeing. I'm aware of 2 class action lawsuits that Facebook has settled relating to privacy concerns. Lane versus Facebook was settled in 2010. That case resulted in no money being awarded to Facebook users. Is that correct?
Congresswoman, I'm not familiar with the details of that.
You're the CEO of the company, correct?
Yes.
Now, this major lawsuit was settled. Do you know about the lawsuit?
Congresswoman, I get briefed on these.
You know about this lawsuit, Lane versus Facebook, yes or no?
I'm not familiar with the details.
Okay, if you can supplement, I'll just tell you, there was this lawsuit and the users got nothing. In another case, Fraley versus Facebook, it resulted in a 2013 settlement fund of $20 million being established with $15 individual payouts to Facebook users beginning in 2016. Is that correct?
Congresswoman, I'm not familiar.
You don't know about that one either. Okay, well, I'll tell you
with our
it happened.
team, but I don't remember the exact details of it.
Okay. Now, as a result of a 2011 FTC investigation into Facebook's privacy policy, do you know about that one?
The FTC investigation?
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Okay. You entered into a consent decree with the FTC, which carried no financial penalty for Facebook. Is that correct?
Congresswoman, I don't remember if we had a financial penalty.
You're the CEO of the company. You entered into a consent decree, and you don't remember if you had a financial penalty.
I remember the consent decree. The consent decree is extremely important to how we operate the company.
I would think a financial penalty would be too. Okay. Well, the reason you probably don't remember it is because the FTC doesn't have the authority to issue financial penalties for first-time violations. The reason I'm asking these questions, sir, is because we continue to have these abuses and these data breaches, but at the same time, it doesn't seem like future activities are prevented. And so I think one of the things that we need to look at in the future, as we work with you and others in the industry, is putting really robust penalties in place in case of improper actions. And that's why I asked these questions.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Louisiana, the whip of the House, Mr. Scalise, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Mr. Zuckerberg, I appreciate you coming here. I know, as some of my other colleagues mentioned, you came here voluntarily, and we appreciate the opportunity to have this discussion because clearly what your company's been able to do has revolutionized the way that people can connect. And there's a tremendous benefit to our country. Now it's a worldwide platform, and it's helped create a shortage of computer programmers. So as a former computer programmer, I think we would both agree that we need to encourage more people to go into the computer sciences because our country is a world leader, thanks to your company and so many others. But it obviously raises questions about privacy and data and how the data is shared and what is a user's expectation of where that data goes. So I want to ask a few questions. First, would you agree that we need more computer programmers and people to go into that field?
Congressman, yes.
That's a public service announcement we just made, so appreciate you joining me in that. And Mr. Shimkus's question, it was really a follow-up to a question yesterday that you weren't able to answer, but it was dealing with how Facebook tracks users, especially after they log off. And you had said, in relation to Congressman Shimkus's question, that there is data mining, but it goes on for security purposes. So my question would be, is that data that is mined for security purposes also used to sell as part of the business model?
Congressman, I believe that those are that we collect different data for those, but I can follow up on the details of that.
All right, if you could follow up, I would appreciate that. Getting into this new realm of content review, I know some of the people that work for Facebook, Campbell Brown said, for example, this is changing our relationship with publishers and emphasizing something that Facebook has never done before. It's having a point of view. And you mentioned the Diamond and Silk example where you I think, described it as a mistake. Were the people who made that mistake held accountable in any way?
Congressman, let me follow up with you on that. That situation developed while I was here preparing to testify, so I'm not in all the details.
I do want to ask you about a study that was done dealing with the algorithm that Facebook uses to describe what is fed to people through the news feed. And what they found was, after this new algorithm was implemented, that there was a tremendous bias against conservative news and content and a favorable bias towards liberal content. And if you can look at that, that shows a 16-point disparity, which is concerning. I would imagine you're not going to want to share the algorithm itself with us. I'd encourage you if you wanted to do that, but who develops the algorithm? I wrote algorithms before, and you can determine whether or not you want to write an algorithm to sort data, to compartmentalize data, but you can also put a bias in if that's the directive. Was there a directive to put a bias in? And first, are you aware of this bias that many people have looked at and analyzed and seen?
Congressman, this is a really important question. There is absolutely no directive in any of the changes that we make to have a bias in anything that we do. To the contrary, our goal is to be a platform for all ideas. And
I know we're almost out of time, so if you can go back and look and determine if there was a bias. Whoever developed that software, you have 20,000 people that work on some of this data analysis. If you can look and see if there is a bias and let us know if there is and what you're doing about it, because that is disturbing when you see that kind of disparity. Finally, there's been a lot of talk about Cambridge and what they've done in the last campaign. In 2008 and 2012, there was also a lot of this done. One of the lead digital heads of the Obama campaign said recently, Facebook was surprised we were able to suck out the whole social graph, but they didn't stop us once they realized that was what we were doing. They came to office in the days following the election, recruiting, and were very candid that they allowed us to do things they wouldn't have allowed someone else to do because they were on our side. Now, that's a direct quote from one of the heads of the Obama digital team. What would she mean by they, Facebook, were on our side?
Congressman, we didn't allow the Obama campaign to do anything that any developer on the platform wouldn't have otherwise been able to do.
So she was making an inaccurate statement in your point of view?
Yes.
All right.
Gentleman's
Appreciate the
time's
comments and
expired.
look forward to those answers. Yield back the balance of my time.
Chair now recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Doyle, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Zuckerberg, welcome. Facebook uses some of the most advanced data processing techniques and technologies on the planet, correct?
Congressman, we pride ourselves on doing good technical work.
Thank you.
Yes.
And you use these technologies to flag spam, identify offensive content, and track user activity, right?
Among other things.
But in 2015, when The Guardian first reported on Cambridge Analytica using Facebook user data, was that the first time Facebook learned about these allegations?
Congressman, in 2015, when we heard that the developer on our platform, Alexander Kogan...
Was that the first time you heard about it?
That
when it was reported by The Guardian?
Data to Cambridge Analytica?
When The Guardian made the report, was that the first time you heard about it? Thank you. So do you routinely learn about these violations through the press?
Congressman, sometimes we do. I generally think that...
Let me ask you this. You had the capability to audit developers' use of Facebook user data and do more to prevent these abuses. But the problem at Facebook not only persisted, it proliferated. In fact, relatives to other types of problems you had on your platform, it seems as though you turned a blind eye to this, correct?
Congressman, I disagree with that assessment. I do think that going forward, we need to take a more proactive view of policing what the developers do. But looking back, we've had an app review process. We investigate
But
tens
Mr.
of
Zuckerberg,
thousands
it
of
seems
apps a
to us
year.
that it seems like you were more concerned with attracting and retaining developers on your platform than you were with ensuring the security of Facebook's user data. Let me switch gears. Your company is subject to a 20-year consent decree with the FTC since 2011, correct?
Congressman, we have a consent decree, yes.
And that decree emerged out of a number of practices that Facebook engaged in that the FTC deemed to be unfair and deceptive. One such practice was making Facebook users' private information public without sufficient notice or consent, claiming that Facebook certified the security and integrity of certain apps when in fact it did not, and enabling developers to access excessive information about a user and their friends. Is that correct?
Congressman, I'm not familiar with all of the things that the FTC said, although I'm
these
very
were
familiar
part of
with
the
FTC
consent
order
decree.
itself.
So I think I'm just concerned that despite this consent decree, Facebook allowed developers access to an unknown number of user profiles on Facebook for years, potentially hundreds of million, potentially more, and not only allowed but partnered with individuals and app developers such as Alexander Kogan, who turned around and sold that data on the open market and to companies like Cambridge Analytica. Mr. Zuckerberg, you've said that you plan to audit tens of thousands of developers that may have improperly harvested Facebook user data. You also said that you plan to give all Facebook users access to some user controls that will be made available in the EU under the GDPR. But it strikes me that there's a real trust gap here. This developer data issue is just one example. But why should we trust you to follow through on these promises when you have demonstrated repeatedly that you're willing to flout both your own internal policies and government oversight when the need suits you?
Congressman, respectfully, I disagree with that characterization. We've had a review process for apps for years. We've reviewed tens of thousands of apps a year and taken action against a number of them. Our process was not enough to catch a developer.
I see my time is almost over. I just want to say, Mr. Chairman, that to my mind, the only way we're going to close this trust gap is through legislation that creates and empowers a sufficiently resourced expert oversight agency with rulemaking authority to protect the digital privacy and ensure that companies protect our users' data. With that, I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. Chair recognizes the Chairman of the Subcommittee on Digital Commerce and Consumer Protection, Mr. Latta of Ohio, for 4 minutes.
Well, thank you very much, Chairman, and Mr. Zuckerberg, thanks very much for being with us today. First question I have is, can you tell the Facebook users that the Russians and the Chinese have not used the same methods as other third parties to scrape the entire social network for their gain?
Congressman, we have not seen that activity.
None at all?
Not that I am aware of.
Okay. Let me ask this question. You know, a little bit's been going on when you made your opening statement in regards to what you'd like to see done with the company and steps moving forward. There's been a couple of questions, you know, about you're going to be investigating the apps. How many apps are there out there that you'd have to investigate?
There are tens of thousands of apps that had access to a large amount of people's information before we locked down the platform in 2014. Okay. So we're going to do an investigation that first involves looking at their patterns of API access and what those companies were doing. And then if we find anything suspicious, then we're going to bring in third-party auditors to go through their technical and physical systems to understand what they did. And if we find that they misused any data, then we'll ban them from our platform, make sure that they delete the data, and tell everyone affected. Okay.
Just to follow up on that then, how long would it take to investigate each of those apps once you're doing that? Because again, when you're talking about tens of thousands and you're going through that entire process, then how long would it take to go through each one of those apps?
Yes, Congressman, it's going to take many months to do this full process.
Okay.
And it's going to be an expensive process with a lot of auditors, but we think that this is the right thing to do at this point. All right. You know, before we'd thought that when developers told us that they weren't going to sell data, that was a good representation. But one of the big lessons that we've learned here is that clearly we cannot just take developers' word for it. We need to go and enforce that.
Okay. When we're talking about audits, there's been some questions about this. On the audits, in 2011, Facebook did sign that consent order with the Federal Trade Commission for the privacy violations. Part of that consent order requires Facebook to submit third-party privacy audits to the FTC every 2 years. First, are you aware of the audits? And second, why didn't the audits disclose or find these issues with the developers' access to users' data?
Yes, Congressman, I'm aware of the audits that we do. We do audits every other year. They're ongoing. The audits have not found material issues with our privacy programs in place at the company. I think the broader question here is we've had this FTC consent decree, but we take a broader view of what our responsibility for people's privacy is. And our view is that what a developer did, they represented to us that they were going to use the data in a certain way, and then in their own systems went out and sold it. We do not believe is a violation of the consent decree, but it's clearly a breach of people's trust. And the standard that we hold ourselves to is not just following the laws that are in place, but we just want to take a broader view of this, of protecting people's information.
Just about out of time here. Are you aware that Facebook did provide the auditors with all the information they requested when doing the FTC audits?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah, did Facebook provide the auditors with all the information they requested when they were preparing the audit for the FTC?
Congressman, I believe we do provide the audits to the FTC.
Okay, but all the information was provided. And were you ever personally asked to provide information or feedback in these audits to the FTC?
Congressman, not personally, although I'm briefed on all of the audits by our team.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, my time's expired, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Chair recognizes gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Schakowsky, for 4 minutes.
Working at it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, you have a long history of growth and success, but you also have a long list of apologies. In 2003, it started at Harvard. I apologize for any harm done as a result of my neglect. 2006, we really messed this one up. 2007, we simply did a bad job. I apologize for it. 2010, sometimes we move too fast. 2011, I'm the first to admit that we've made a bunch of mistakes. 2017, this is in connection with the Russian manipulation of the election and the data that came from Facebook initially. I ask for forgiveness. I will work to do better. So it seems to me from this history that self-regulation, this is proof to me that self-regulation simply does not work. I have a bill, the Secure and Protect Americans Data Act, that I hope you will take a look at. Very simple bill about setting standards for how you have to make sure that the data is protected, deadlines on when you have to release that information to the public. Certainly it ought to go to the FTC as well. But in response to the questions about the apps and the investigation that you're going to do, you said you don't necessarily know how long. Have you set any deadline for that? Because we know, as my colleague said, that there are tens of thousands. There's actually been 9 million apps. How long do we have to wait for that kind of investigation?
Congresswoman, we expect it to take many months.
Years?
I hope not.
I want to ask you, yesterday, following up on your response to Senator Baldwin's question, you said yesterday that Kogan also sold data to other firms. You named Unoya Technologies. How many are there total, and what are their names? Can we get that? And how many are there total?
Congresswoman, we can follow up with you to make sure that you get all that information.
Yeah, but order of magnitude.
I don't believe it was a large number, but as we complete the audits, we will know more.
What's a large number?
A handful.
Has Facebook tried to get those firms to delete user data and its derivatives?
Yes, Congresswoman. In 2015, when we first learned about it, we immediately demanded that the app developer and the firms that he sold it to delete the data, and they all represented us that they had. It wasn't until about a month ago that new reports surfaced that suggested that they hadn't, which is what has kicked off us needing to now go do this full audit and investigation and investigate all these other apps that have come up.
And were derivatives deleted?
Congresswoman, we need to complete the investigation and audit before I can confirm that.
You are
What
looking at
they've represented to
derivatives.
us is that they have, but we need to now get into their systems and confirm that before I want to stand up here confidently and say what they've done.
So Mr. Green asked about the General Data Protection Regulation on May 25th that's going to go into effect by the EU. And your response was, let me ask, is your response that exactly the protections that are guaranteed, not the, what did you say? Yeah, not just the controls, but all the rights that are guaranteed under the General Data Protection regulations will be applied to Americans as well?
Congresswoman, the GDPR has a bunch of different important pieces. One is around offering controls over every use of people's data.
Right, that's one.
That we're doing. The second is around pushing for affirmative consent and putting a control in front of people that walks people through their choices.
Exactly.
We're going to do that too. The second, although that might be different depending on the laws in specific countries and different places, but we're going to put a tool at the top of everyone's app that walks them through their settings and helps them understand what is going on.
It sounds like it will not be exact. And let me say, as we look at the distribution of information, that who's going to protect us from Facebook is also a question. Thank you.
Gentlelady's time's expired. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Washington State, the conference chairman.
Oh, yeah, turn on. Thank you. And thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for joining us. Today is clearly timely. There's a number of extremely important questions Americans have about Facebook, including questions about safety and security of their data, about the process by which their data is made available to third parties, about what Facebook is doing to protect consumer privacy as we move forward. But one of the issues that is concerning me, and I'd like to dig a little deeper into, is how Facebook treats content on its platform. So, Mr. Zuckerberg, given the extensive reach of Facebook and its widespread use as a tool of public expression, do you think Facebook has the unique responsibility to ensure that it has clear standards regarding the censorship of content on its platform? And do you think Facebook adequately and clearly defines what these standards are for its users?
Congresswoman, yes, I feel like we have a very important responsibility to outline what the content policies are and the community standards are. This is one of the areas that frankly, I'm worried we're not doing a good enough job at right now, especially because
as an American-based company where about 90% of the people in our community are outside of the US, where there are different social norms and different cultures, it's not clear to me that our current situation of how we define community standards is going to be effective for articulating that around the world. So
we're looking at different ways to evolve that, and I think that this is one of the more important things that we will do.
Okay, and even focusing on content for here in America, I'd like to shift gears just a little bit and talk about Facebook's recent changes to its news feed algorithm. Your head of news partnerships recently said that Facebook is, quote, taking a step to define what quality news looks like and give that a boost so that overall there's less competition from news. Can you tell me what she means by less competition from news? And also, how does Facebook objectively determine what is acceptable news and what safeguards exist to ensure that, say, religious or conservative content is treated fairly?
Yes, Congresswoman. I'm not sure specifically what that person was referring to, but I can walk you through what the algorithm change was if that's useful.
Well, maybe I'll just go on to my other questions then. There's an issue of content discrimination, and it's not a problem unique to Facebook. There's a number of high-profile examples of edge providers engaging in blocking and censoring religious and conservative political content. In November, FCC Chairman Pai even said that edge providers routinely block or discriminate against content they don't like. This is obviously a serious allegation. How would you respond to such an allegation, and what is Facebook doing to ensure that its users are being treated fairly and objectively by content reviewers?
Congresswoman, the principle that we're a platform for all ideas is something that I care very deeply about. I am worried about bias, and we take a number of steps to make sure that none of the changes that we make are targeted in any kind of biased way. And I'd be happy to follow up with you and go into more detail on that, because I agree that this is a serious issue.
Over Easter, a Catholic university's ad with a picture of a historic San Diego cross was rejected by Facebook. Though Facebook addressed the error within days, that it happened at all is deeply disturbing. Could you tell me what was so shocking, sensational, or excessively violent about the ad to cause it to be initially censored? Given that your company has since said it did not violate terms of service, how can users know that their content is being viewed and judged accordingly to objective standards?
Congresswoman, it sounds like we made a mistake there. I apologize for that. And unfortunately, with the amount of content in our systems and the current systems that we have in place to review, we make a relatively small % of mistakes in content review, but that can be, that's too many. And this is an area where we need to improve. What I will say is that I wouldn't extrapolate from a few examples to assuming that the overall system is biased. I get how people can look at that and draw that conclusion, but I don't think that that reflects the way that we're trying to build the system or what we've seen.
Gentleladies.
Thank you, and I just, this is an important issue in building trust, and that is going to be important as we move forward. Thank you, and I yield.
Gentleladies' time's expired. Chair recognizes gentleman from North Carolina, Mr. Butterfield, for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for your testimony here today. Mr. Zuckerberg, you have stated that your goal with Facebook is to build strong communities, and certainly that sounds good. You've stated here today on the record that you did not live up to the privacy expectations, and I appreciate that. But this committee, and you must know this committee is counting on you to right a wrong, and I hope you get it. In my opinion, Facebook is here to stay, and so you have an obligation to protect the data that you collect and the data that you use. And Congress has the power to regulate your industry, and we have the power to penalize misconduct. But I want to go in a different direction today, sir. You and your team certainly know how I feel about racial diversity in corporate America, and Sheryl Sandberg and I talk about that all of the time. Let me ask you this, and the Congressional Black Caucus has been very focused on holding your industry accountable, not just Facebook, your industry accountable for increasing African-American inclusion at all levels of the industry. And I know you have a number of diversity initiatives. In 2017, you've increased your black representation from 2% to 3%. While this is a small increase, it's better than none. And this does not nearly meet the definition of building a racially diverse community. CEO leadership, and I've found this to be absolutely true. CEO leadership on issues of diversity is the only way that the technology industry will change. So will you commit, sir, to personally convene a meeting of CEOs in your sectors, many of them, all of them perhaps are your friends, and to do this very quickly to develop a strategy to increase racial diversity in the technology industry?
Congressman, I think that that's a good idea, and we should follow up on it. From the conversations that I have with my fellow leaders in the tech industry, I know that this is something that we all understand that the whole industry is behind on, and Facebook is certainly a big part of that issue. And we care about this not just from the justice angle, but because we know that having diverse viewpoints is what will help us serve our community better, which is ultimately what we're here to do. And I think we know that the industry is behind on this and want to take
We've
steps
talked
to
with you over the years about this, and while there has been some marginal improvement, we must do better than we have done. Recently, you appointed an African-American, our friend Ken Chenault, to your board, and of course Erskine Bowles is already on your board, who is also a friend, but we've got to concentrate more on board membership for African-Americans and also minorities at the entry level within your company. I was looking at your website a few minutes ago, and it looks like you list 5 individuals as leadership in your company, but none of them is African-American. I was just looking at it, not only you and Cheryl, but David, Mike, and Chris. That is your leadership team, and this does not reflect America. Can you improve the numbers on your leadership team to be more diverse?
Congressman, this is an issue that we're focused on. We have a broader leadership than just 5 people. I mean,
it's not on your website.
I understand that.
We can do better than that, Mr. Zuckerberg. We certainly can. Do you plan to add an African-American to your leadership team in the foreseeable future, and will you commit that you will continue to work with us, the Congressional Black Caucus, to increase diversity within your company that you're so proud of?
Congressman, we will certainly work with you. This is an important issue.
We also find that companies' failure to retain black employees contributes to their low presence at technology companies, and there's little transparency in retention numbers. So will you commit to providing numbers on your retention? That's the big word, retention of your employees, disaggregated by race in your diversity update starting this year? Can we get that data? That's the starting point.
Congressman, we try to include a lot of important information in the diversity updates. I will go discuss that with my team after I get back from this hearing.
I'm out of time, sir. I'll take this up with your team in another setting. We'll be out there in a few weeks. Thank you.
Gentleman's time has expired. Chair now recognizes the chairman of the Oversight and Investigation Subcommittee, gentleman from Mississippi, Mr. Harper, for 4 minutes.
Ready.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg, for being here. And we don't lose sight of the fact that you're a great American success story. It is a part of everyone's life and business, sometimes maybe too often. But I thank you for taking the time to be here. And our concern is to make sure that it's fair. We worry because we're looking at possible government regulation here, certainly the self-governing, which has had some issues, and how you factor that. And we're trying to keep up with the algorithm changes on how you determine the prioritization of the news feeds, and you look at, well, it needs to be trustworthy and reliable and relevant. Well, who's going to determine that? That also has an impact. And even though you say you don't want the bias, it is dependent upon who's setting what those standards are in that. And so I want to ask you a couple of questions, if I may. And this is a quote from Paul Grewal, Facebook's VP and General Counsel. He said, "Like all app developers, Mr. Alexander Kogan requested and gained access to information from people after they chose to download his app." Now, under Facebook policy in 2013, if Cambridge Analytica had developed the This Is Your Digital Life app, they would have had access to the same data they purchased from Mr. Kogan. Would that be correct?
Congressman, that's correct. And a different developer could have built that app.
Okay, now, according to politifact.com, and this is a quote, the Obama campaign and Cambridge Analytica both gained access to huge amounts of information about Facebook users and their friends, and in neither case did the friends of app users consent, close quote. This data that Cambridge Analytica acquired was used to target voters with political messages, much as the same type of data was used by the Obama campaign to target voters in 2012. Would that be correct?
Congressman, the big difference between these cases is that in the Kogan case, people signed into that app expecting to share the data with Kogan, and then he turned around and in violation of our policies and in violation of people's expectations, sold it to a third-party firm, to Cambridge Analytica in this case.
Sure.
I think that we were very clear about how the platform worked at the time, that anyone could sign into an app, and they'd be able to bring their information if they wanted and some information from their friends. People had control over that, so if you wanted, you could turn off the ability to sign into apps or turn off the ability for your friends to be able to bring your information. The platform worked the way that we had designed it at the time. I think we now know that we should have a more restrictive platform where people cannot also bring information from their friends and can only bring their own information, but that's the way that the system worked.
And whether in violation of the agreement or not, you agree that users have an expectation that their information would be protected and remained private and not be sold. And so that's something that, the reason that we're here today. You know, and I can certainly understand the general public's outrage if they're concerned regarding the way Cambridge Analytica required their information. But if people are outraged because they use that for political reasons, would that be hypocritical? Shouldn't they be equally outraged that the Obama campaign used the data of Facebook users without their consent in 2012?
Congressman, what I think people are rightfully very upset about is that an app developer that people had shared data with sold it to someone else, and frankly, we didn't do enough to prevent that or understand it soon enough.
Thank
and
you.
Now we have to go through and put in place systems that prevent that from happening again, and making sure that we have sufficient controls in place in our ecosystem so that way developers can't abuse people's data.
Thank you, Mr. Zuckerberg. My time's expired. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back the balance of his time. Gentlelady from California, Ms. Matsui, is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Zuckerberg. Thank you very much here. You know, I was just thinking about Facebook and how you developed your platform, first from a social platform amongst friends and colleagues and enjoying a community. And a lot of it was based upon trust, because you knew your friends, right? But that evolved into this business platform. One of the pillars still was trust. And I think I think everyone here agree that trust is in short supply here. And that's why we're here today. Now, you've constantly maintained that consumers own the data they provided to Facebook and should have control over it. And I appreciate that, and I just want to understand more about what that means. To me, if you own something, you ought to have some say about how and when it's used. But to be clear, I don't just mean pictures, email addresses, Facebook groups, or pages. I understand the data and information consumers provided to Facebook can be and perhaps is used by algorithms to form assumptions and inferences about users to better target ads to the individuals. Now, do you believe that consumers actually own their data even when that data has been supplemented by a data broker, assumptions algorithms have made about that user or otherwise? And this is kind of the question that Ms. Blackburn has come up with, our own comprehensive profile, which is kind of our virtual self.
Congresswoman, I believe that people own all of their own content. Where this gets complicated is, let's say I take a photo and I share it with you. Now, is that my photo or is it your photo? I would take the position that it's our photo, which is why we make it so that you can't bring, it's that I can bring that photo to another app if I want, but you can't.
Well, once it gets to the data broker, though, so there's certain algorithms and certain assumptions made. What happens after that?
Sorry, can you clarify that?
Well, what I mean is that if you supplement this data, you know, you say you're owning it, but you supplement this when other data brokers, you know, use their own algorithms to supplement this and make their own assumptions, then what happens there? Because that is, to me, somebody else is taking that over. How can you say that we own that data?
Congresswoman, all the data that you put in, all the content that you share on Facebook is yours. You control how it's used. You can remove it at any time. You can get rid of your account and get rid of all of it at once. You
No,
can
but
get rid
you
of
can't
specific
claw it
things.
back once it gets out there, right? I mean, that's really, we might own our own data, but once it's used in advertising, we lose control over it. Is that not right?
Congresswoman, I disagree with that, because one core tenet of our advertising system is that we don't sell data to advertisers. Advertisers don't get access to your data. There's a core misunderstanding about how that system works, which is that, let's say if you're a shop and you're selling muffins, right? You might want to target people in a specific town who might be interested in baking or some demographic, but we don't send that information to you. We just show the message to the right people. And that's a really important, I think, common misunderstanding about how the system works.
Facebook sells ads based at least on part of the data users provide to Facebook. That's right. And the more data that Facebook collects allows you to better target ads to users or classes of users. So even if Facebook doesn't earn money from selling data, doesn't Facebook earn money from advertising based on that data?
Yes, Congresswoman, we run ads. That's the business model is running ads. And we use the data that people put into the system in order to make the ads more relevant, which also makes them more valuable. But it's what we hear from people is that if they're going to see ads, they want them to be good and relevant.
But we're not controlling that data.
No, you have complete control over that.
The gentlelady's time has expired. As previously agreed, we will now take a 5-minute recess, and committee members and our witness need to plan to be back in about 5 minutes. We stand in recess.